Hey guys, welcome to this patch analysis video brought to you by SUNSfan and syndereN. This is of course 6.81b, which typically speaking when there's B's and C's and D's involved, not the hugest of patches, but I think this is very prevalent as far as TI4 is concerned. syndereN, welcome, good sir.
Hello. Yeah, like you said, you pretty much covered it. This is a way shorter patch and a way shorter analysis than the last one we did, which I think some people won't mind because that was a pretty long one. So, well, let's get into it.
Alright, so first and foremost, Ancient Apparition, the Ice Vortex I should say. The slow has been decreased a bit. I don't think this really changes too much. He's still going to get picked. He's picked for his ultimate more than anything, I feel like.
Yeah, this is a couple of things. It's just a slight nerf because the Ice Vortex also got buffed recently in terms of the stickiness of the AoE slow it does, and of course the minus resist. So it's just also a way of making the scaling seem a little more logical. If you look at the levels, the level 1 is 18 and the level 4 is 30. And now it's 15 to 30 and it scales by 5 per level. So the leveling is a little more intuitive now and it makes it a little weaker in the beginning, which I think is okay.
And of course we need to put this in conjunction with the 6.81 changes, which for him, and of course this is based off of memory alone, I believe it was just Chilling Touch. The debuff, it's a little bit, what was it, -5 extra?
Yes,
or less attack speed,
right.
or whatever. So
yeah.
In conjunction, so small nerfs for him overall still, even combined. But Batrider, this is the big one. As we'll call it the big one. Sticky Napalm, bonus damage now halved against non-hero units. I would assume that this pretty much is just in relation to the jungle as far as its effectiveness.
It's depending on how you play Batrider. Today most people play the Batrider in the off lane or in jungle. It's played pretty rarely mid compared to what it used to be, but just in the laning stage, if you remember a couple of versions ago, Batrider lost like 10 base damage. He got nerfed really hard in that one. And the problem is, even with that reduced damage, he could still just farm the lane by throwing a couple of stacks of Sticky Napalm on the creeps, and then he would outfarm the opponent by having more damage. But now that it has half effect, he's a much weaker laner in terms of getting CS. And in the jungle, when you farm multiple stacks, or at least the first early stacks with Batrider, you want to have one level in Firefly and one level in Napalm. But now you'll need to commit much more time and mana to be able to farm the camp, since you'll need to stack up the Napalm a couple of more times. I think previously Batriders would stack up, if they have like a double or triple stack camp, they would start, they would stack up 3 or maybe 4 times, and then they would start farming it. Maybe now you need to stack it like 6 or 7 times to, or maybe even 8 to be sure you get it with the extra damage. So it's a great nerf, I think. It makes a lot of sense. I was not sure how big of a nerf it would be, if it would be ridiculously big or not as big as people expect, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see as it comes into play. Sometimes it's hard to predict, but yeah, I think it's really good.
And this one I think we'll probably spend more time than the other heroes, but I would say that, okay, so Batrider, I don't feel like people won't pick him because of this, not even close. I mean, consider the fact that he's still a great offlane hero. He can survive the lane pretty easily. He can go off of the terrain, for God's sake. It's very difficult to take him out. But like you said, if he was taken out of lane even for a little bit, he would just go to the jungle right away. And this just increases the time investment on the jungling. I feel like the hero itself, what makes him broken, if you will, is once he gets the Blink Dagger, once he gets Blink Dagger and Force Staff, he's the best initiation hero in the game. He can take somebody completely out of position, which is probably, as far as game-breaking abilities, I would put this at top of the list, and that hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is if you do get him out of lane, it's going to take him a little bit longer to get those items up. Yeah, so I think he's still picked.
What I really like about that change is that it keeps the hero at his strengths, but like you said, if you manage to counter Batrider, as you remember in previous games we've cast together, sometimes Batrider gets countered and then he just makes an immediate comeback in like 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, if you actually manage to counterplay the hero, it's going to take him longer. And yes, at some point he will have his Blink Dagger Force Staff, but if that gets delayed by just a few minutes because of this change, or maybe just a minute or 2, that could be one crucial gank that doesn't happen, or a team fight that doesn't happen, and then you as a team are rewarded more for punishing this hero and for counterwarding him and whatnot. So I really like this approach. I think it's very wise.
Alright, so moving on, and I'm assuming these ones are going to be a little bit quicker. Bounty Hunter, the Shadow Walk duration has been increased. Okay. That's just one of those things like, hey, there's Bounty Hunter in the game still, guys. Lol, lol, lol. Of course, in the last patch, I believe his track, the range was equivalent to what level 3 was, if that makes sense. So
exactly.
So he's been buffed a decent amount.
The one thing that's important about this is that the previous bounty hunter Shadow Walk had the same duration as cooldown on level 1. Now the duration is longer than the cooldown, so you can actually stay in it. That's what's really relevant about this. Of course, it's not the biggest of buffs, but
gotta get that
it's
double
a kind of
that double backstab damage or whatever it's called.
what's that?
Actually, you can do triple for the most part. Where the extra damage you get from attacking out of invis.
Yeah, it's true. You can do that in level 1. And what's good about this for bounty hunters is that previously most bounty hunters would skill backstab, or sorry, would skill Shadow Walk level 2 so that they had longer duration than cooldown. But now that they don't have to do that, not only is Shadow Walk better, but it means they don't have to skill it twice. So they get something else as well. That's what you need to remember.
He's always a hero that, yeah, the distribution of skills was always very weird. Like, you just mix and match a lot. Like, I feel like 2 and Shoryuken. I think that one needs to be changed too to scale, perhaps. A little
it scales
bit
really weirdly.
Like, you just stop at 2, and then Janata, I feel like, probably scales the best out of any of his skills. But that's an interesting here. I think he's still good overall. Anyway, Doom, Devour mana cost has been rescaled, so it's equivalent to what the level 1 mana cost is, which is not good for him. He's a very mana dependent hero, but he's been picked quite a bit. I don't think this changes a whole lot for him particularly. What are your thoughts?
No, it's not really the biggest of deals. Actually, I thought this was I read this as a cooldown change, but it's the mana cost, so it's a way less of a deal than I thought it was. I thought it was the cooldown. So yeah, with the mana rescaling, considering I don't feel like it really made sense that it got cheaper later on. If anything, it should get more expensive the way the ability works. So keeping it the same on all levels, I think, is fine. It was a weird interaction overall, so it's a good nerf. Disallows Doom a little bit more from farming extremely freely in the mid portion of the game, where Devour basically is almost a non-factor in terms of mana cost. Now it's a little more relevant that you don't just spam it exactly like you want if you want to be able to fight in the near proximity of using it. So I think that's it's okay as well.
And moving on to Drow Ranger, I really like this change. Gust duration increase. I mean, it was increased in the last patch. I believe it was 0.2 originally. Then it was changed to 0.5. Now it scales from 0.6 to 0.9. This is a very cool ability. And I remember when we were at the qualifiers, when Fog joined us, he was talking about how in the game, as you remember, Mouse versus Liquid, where they were delayed for the game 5, and they already knew the picks.
Oh, you mean what was that? Gnar versus Liquid.
Or what did I say?
Liquid. You said Mouse. Yeah, Gnar versus Liquid.
Gnar versus Liquid, where they would pick Drow. The entire idea was to get a Blink Dagger. This is really interesting. A Blink Dagger on Drow. You would initiate behind the enemy and gust them into your team. I thought that was a pretty cool idea. It was kind of like, it's not as good as a Deafening Blast, I would say, which actually we'll be getting into that a little bit sooner as well. I think 0.9 is pretty legitimate. It's a really good spell.
Yeah, it's starting to get where it should be, because that spell, since it got introduced, has still been pretty underwhelming, to be honest. And the important thing about this is not only that it sets up your team, but it gives you more time to move. And Drow Ranger is all about staying at range, so her ultimate works. So with the longer duration on the knockback, with 0.9 instead of 0.5, you might actually have enough time to create the gap you need to have your agility back. That's really important. So it's another good change to a hero that, in my opinion, really needed a buff. So all good.
Just don't buy Scotty on her, you'll be fine. So moving on to Earthshaker. Turn rate has been improved. I didn't even know his was that bad. I guess it makes sense considering all things. I wasn't aware that the AoE was different for the Echo Slam initial damage, Echo Search, and the damage AoE itself, which is now consistent across the board and all have been slightly buffed. And it may not seem like that big of a buff, but especially with the Echo damage AoE, just imagine the 75 extra area across the entire area to begin with, if that makes sense. That's pretty... Yeah. I don't know if I call it a huge buff, but that makes his ultimate quite a bit better, I feel.
I still think the turn rate is the bigger buff. It's really important to be able to turn and put fissures at the right time. It's... Consider when you're playing Earthshaker and someone is behind you and they start chasing you, the time it takes you to turn around and fissure them is really long. And this buff is pretty significant. I mean, it's a 50% increase in turn rate, which is a very high number. It's something that's been happening to quite a few heroes in the past. We've seen it on a hero like Magnus. Again, for the kind of the same logic that he wants to be able to turn and skewer, and Shaker can now turn and fissure better. So that's another good change here. I really like this patch. It's pretty short, but I can agree with pretty much everything. So it's really nice.
Tell me what you think about the Elder Titan. So Echo Stomp damage has been increased again. It was increased in the last patch. I feel like the damage isn't the problem with this spell. I mean, I guess
No.
typically speaking, it's what 110 plus 110, right? Because you have one for the astral and one for yourself.
Yeah, if
So,
both hit at the same
right,
time, which is very rare.
right. I mean, the problem is getting the spell off. What is it? Is this the spell that's is the pi the pi amount of time 3.14 seconds to go off, or is that his ult?
It's his ult.
Okay. Well, this one,
the
whatever it
Echo
is,
Stomp takes like 2 seconds, I think.
okay, it's too long. I think that's the main issue. Maybe it would be too good, but
Yeah, I think so too. That's the.
but like, what's the point of increasing the damage on this?
Yeah, I would like, again, it's the pattern we saw starting in the previous, we've seen it in previous patches where the heroes which have undervalued abilities, those abilities are not undervalued, but abilities that are just not good enough compared to the rest of the abilities the hero has, they just get buffed one step at a time. And Echo Stomp is starting to get somewhere where it gets better, but I still don't think this is good enough for people to prioritize it. And I would have liked to see the scaling be a bit better. I think the cast time is okay because this spell is supposed to be hard to hit and a really high impact one. It's absolutely huge if you land it. So if you reduce the cast time on this, I think it's going to be too good, like you said. But I would have liked to see a little bigger buff, like 80, 100, 120, 140 or something like that. So it starts being a little more substantial. And what you need to remember about the damage it displays is since it's cast by the Astral Spirit, this damage is effectively pure. So if 140 damage on level 4 as pure damage is actually pretty decent. That's like a 200 damage magical nuke, roughly? And since that's in an AoE, it starts becoming relevant. But yeah, we'll see. I predict this ability is going to be buffed more in future versions. I still don't think it's good enough.
Agreed. Alright, Enigma, Midnight Pulse. I'm not sure why this needed to be buffed. I think people are actually starting to level it now. But the duration has been increased by 3 seconds, so it pretty much stays there forever. It takes up the entire map at this point. I mean, it's a ridiculous spell.
It's just better. It kind of, it just does the same for a longer time. So it's better for particularly sieging the base and defending the base. Since it got the AoE buff, it's a lot better for zone control. And with an 11-second duration, you can just control that much longer. But I don't think this changes Enigma in essence at all. It's still the same kind of hero, and you will still skill it the same way. It's just nice to have it a little bit better when you're playing it.
Yeah. All right. Invoker, some nerfs. And
I
want to ask you about a couple of these things. So Force Spirit, the magic resistance have been removed. That's fine. I thought they were too good. And I didn't even think the damage. It's just killing them was the problem. Now you can use spells to full effectiveness. Then we'll go to the last part. Deafening Blast Disarm now is able to be dispelled by magic immunity. That's pretty big. And then the Cold Snap rework. Tell me if I'm wrong about this. So the initial and secondary proc damage of 60 to 30 is now 7 times Quas level. So the max you can get is 49 damage at the highest, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
so
true.
that's so the damage of the first and second stun of Cold Snap is worse overall. Like, I guess the second level, once you level it up, it's more, but at first it's way worse than it was before. But the stun is still there, and then after, like, the third and beyond are the same, I'm assuming.
No. Oh, wait, hang on, let me just... No, the way I'm understanding this is, let's say you have Quas level 3, right? Then, before the patch, when you cast Cold Snap, it would deal 60 damage on cast. And then every subsequent hit would deal 30.
Oh.
Now, when you cast it on level 3 Quas, it deals 21 on the initial cast, and then 21 on each subsequent hit. So it's worse in every single aspect until you have level 5 Quas, at which point every attack will deal 35, and then when you get it really high, it's actually better than the old one. And this is just a way of... Cold Snap, I think, was too powerful of an ability overall. The thing was that no matter what build you went, if you went Quas Wax or Quas Exhort, this ability was just absolutely crazy for ganking, for laning, for harassing, all of it. So this is a way of nerfing Invoker's lane presence in particular, which
without taking away its main strength, which is the stun.
Yes, which is the stun, exactly. So it's still, Cold Snap is still good for the main reason it's good, which is to just keep continually stunning the target so they can't move or cast spells. It still does that, just deals less damage, which I think is fine. Forge Spirit's magic resistance remove, I think, again, same logic, less laning presence. They were too hard to deal with in lane and too powerful for harassment for the Exhort build. And then finally, Deafening Blast, Disarm, Dispel. Kind of speaks for itself, right? It's weird that it didn't get removed with BKB. I think Halberd does get removed when you pop it after getting disarmed, so why shouldn't Deafening Blast do the same?
Indeed. Alright, Juggernaut, and this one's hilarious. So, Omni slash damage didn't rescale. That's not anything we have to talk about too much. It just makes it a little bit more consistent, but overall it should be about the same damage. Base attack time has been improved. This was improved last, so he was originally 1.6, which is still faster than like the base one for most heroes is 1.7. So 1.6 base attack time was improved to 1.5 in the last patch, and now 1.4, which, as we talked about in the last patch analysis, not only just for his attacks, his normal attacks, but it works with Omni Slash as well. So, is he turning into like a harder carry? Like, what's the deal with this change that IceFrog's continuing to implement for him?
It's a way, I think just the way the hero works, like what he's supposed to be, it doesn't make sense he has a really bad attack time. So now that the base attack time is faster, I mean, come on, he's supposed to be like a, what's that called? A sword slinger? Does that make sense?
That's, that doesn't sound right.
No, that's not the word.
Sword
you know what I mean. You know what I mean, what he's supposed to be.
He's a swordsman.
Right? Yeah, but not just a swordsman. He's supposed to be like the best thing I can compare him to is a samurai, right? That's also what his weapon looks like.
Right.
So he's supposed to strike quick and hard, right? So his base attack time was really too high for that type, if you will, of hero. So the reason this base attack time is relevant is, like you said, of course, it's just a buff overall. It makes it easier to lane with him because he attacks faster, he does more damage overall, and in Omni Slash he will get more attacks off. But again, the hero to me is still the same. It's good that Omni Slash is more consistent because that was a really big spread and it was too random. Now it's more centralized, so you know what you get. But with this base attack time increase, I guess, the main thing that I can think of is in Omni Slash, if you have orb effects that can proc, that getting that extra attack off perhaps can make a difference. And of course, when you scale later on into the game and get more items, the base attack time becomes even more important, so... I don't think this changes that much, but I think it's also a very difficult hero to buff without making him too good. Blade Fury is amazing. The Healing Ward got buffed not too long ago for an amazing amount of movement speed. His crit got buffed too. His Omni Slash has now been normalized. Like, everything about the hero pretty much has been buffed in the last 4 versions, so... I don't think he needs much more. I think it's more about the metagame revolving around using Juggernaut's strengths, which is he is an incredible early mid-game carry, but he falls off hard in late game, and he still will do that with the base attack time improvement. So if you have a lineup that can use the Healing Ward or can use his early pressure, that's great, else he's still not going to be a pick. So I don't think this is such a big deal, but I like that the hero gets a little bit of buffs. I think it's cool.
Indeed. He's fun to watch, for sure.
Yeah.
Leshrac. Pulse Nova damage has been increased. I don't feel like this was his problem, per se. Okay, I'm going to... Well, first talk to me about this in particular, and then I want to ask you, you know that I hate Lesh's cast animations, very much so.
Yes.
I think in particular for him, I don't understand why there's such a long cast animation for Lightning, which was buffed with the movement speed thing, which we really haven't seen a whole lot of. I feel like they should just lessen the cast time of the Lightning, and then he'd be much better than he is now. I don't know why this... I don't think this pulse does anything.
The question is if that's too good. Again, it's one of those situations where it's very hard to tell until you try it. And Leshrac is supposed to be slow. It's the hero's weakness is that he has bad cast points.
Well, he
that's
sure
kind of
looks
what he
like
does.
he's slow, so I guess that's taken into account.
But the main thing for me about this change is that it's trying to bring Leshrac in as a core, which is something I love to see. I still think this is really not that good as a support. Sure, Pulse Nova is something you will eventually get, but most support Leshracs actually max 2 other abilities before they even get the ultimate. But if you're playing him as a core, this starts to do some really significant mid-game damage. Like, it's kind of crazy to think about how high this damage value really is. And Lesh as a core in comparison to others, of course he's a caster core, so he falls off in late game. But with an early BKB, this hero can completely destroy teamfights with the right lineup. And I think this change is not only, again, it serves as a reminder that this is actually a way of playing the hero. And secondly, I think this is quite significant damage boost if you look at it. It's at 20% damage boost on level... is it on all? No, on level 2 it's 20% higher. And again, the scaling is more logical. That's another thing. It was 66, then it got plus 34, and then it got plus 44. It was a really odd scaling. Yeah. Now it scales linearly, and it's better on all levels, so... Yeah. I think this hero needs to be slow. It's what he does. But buffing him in this direction I think is really cool, and he still has the same strengths as he always has had. The reason he's kind of fallen out of favor is that other supports have started taking over a bit with buffs, but now that they have started getting nerfed again, and maybe teams will want to try to play pushing with Leshrac again, then he can be really powerful as both a core and a support.
love to see him as a core. I mean, that's an old school kind of thing. I think the problem is you can't really like, where do you lane him? Do you put him mid? I guess that's something that I've noticed that they're trying to do a little bit, is bring heroes. I mean, not just with the bottle coring and everything, but bringing heroes that perhaps used to be okay mid, that have no escape mechanism, that can still be decent mid now. So Lesh might be in that same vein.
Yeah,
Quap to some degree, which we'll talk about soon. Yeah, I'd like to see that, because I agree. I feel like Lesh as a support is just underwhelming. Like Diabolical Edict is so good, the Split Earth is so good, but then Lightning Storm, you don't get it up fast enough to actually deal enough damage in the mid game, and his ult is, you just don't pick it up pretty much.
That's why he's crazy as a core when he actually gets the levels. He provides so damn much, and now with Pulse Nova being buffed too, I think I would still consider him more of a safe laner than a mid, because he is just too weak in most games to play mid. He's excellent against melee heroes because you can predict their last hits and then drop a stun when they're about to last hit and do some good harassment, but just in the safe lane, let him get free farm, let him get what he needs, and then he can take over in mid game. I'm expecting we get to see that a couple of times. We've seen it from, I think it's Empire who have experienced with it on Silent, and I love to see this hero played, so I hope this brings a little more attention to the ability to play him as a core.
I feel we see more Necro as core, and I don't see why. And actually, that's another thing to bring up. I don't think he was buffed at all in this patch. That hero is just useless. He's garbage. I think he's bottom 5 for me. He can be good, but it's very rare. Like, you have to have a perfect lineup. Anywho, moving on. Lina, which you will love this, I'm sure. You know what? You played her a lot as a pro. Do you even like the hero? Do you like playing her?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fun hero. I'm not quite sure what made this change come into effect. I think it's a little weird. The scaling is weird too, but I honestly cannot tell you what the logic is behind this. I feel like every previous change we've seen in the patch, we've been able to like explain why. But Light Strike Array is not an underpicked ability on Lina. It is an absolute must in pretty much, well, in every single build with Lina you want to have this. And you don't leave this ability on level 1, so there's no point in, you know, you level it just to get more damage on it. So I'm not quite sure what this scaling is supposed to do. If it was considered too weak, maybe that was the reason, because many other AoE stuns in mid-late game are actually a lot better than 1.6. Like Impale stun for how much is it? More than 2 seconds.
I should say, what is Split Earth
Burst
scaling?
Strike more than 2 seconds.
That's similar, very
Split
similar.
Earth is 2 seconds on all levels on stun.
Okay.
So it's actually still a weaker stun duration, which makes sense because it's easier to land than Split Earth, but in comparison to other stuns, I can agree with the fact that this stun was pretty underwhelming in terms of duration. But then I think maybe you should have buffed it on all levels, but maybe that would have been too good. I don't know. I could imagine Light Strike Array still.
Picked, so. Of course, in the last patch, she get
I don't know.
her Aghanims now her ult goes through BKB when you have Ags. Haven't seen that in a pro match yet. Of course, haven't really seen Lina in a pro match since they changed that. But yeah, we'll see if that makes any play here going into TI. So Lycan, howl duration has been decreased by 2 seconds, and the damage has been reduced at the earlier levels. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this was good. This was something I wanted to happen, so I'm happy it did. I think Howl was getting too powerful, and the thing is, Lycan is strong enough in himself, just where he is, but the global presence of Howl just started getting so incredibly strong, and these two ways of nerfing the ability at the same time, I think, are good enough. We talked about how we thought the shapeshift nerf was not going to be enough to bring him out of the game, or that's not what we want, right? But to not make him an obvious first pick every single time, pretty much. And now with this nerf again, this is what I think made more sense than the shapeshift nerf. So I'm really happy with this. Makes him a little weaker early on. I don't know what's the bigger nerf, if it's the duration or the bonus damage reduction. I want to say the duration is a bigger deal.
Well, because once you level up everything, then you can't increase.
But even on level 1, I think it's more important that it lasts 12 seconds than that it gives 20 damage. I don't know. That extra 6 damage in comparison to 2 seconds. Well, regardless, it's a good nerf to the hero, and it still, again, it keeps the hero's identity still. It doesn't change what he's good at all, which is still pushing towers early on, being ridiculous at taking Roche. He is a little slower at that now that he loses 2 seconds on the Howl, but he's still good enough at it, so I think it's fine.
All right, Mirana, and sometimes there's some changes made, and I'm like, why wasn't this like this before? Like, it's nothing that I was like looking at on, like, how do I explain this? It's nothing that I would have noticed unless they had changed it, if that makes sense. Like, I wouldn't have said, oh, they need to change this. It's just now that I see the change, I'm like, Oh, I guess that makes sense. So the Sacred Arrow, minimum stun duration has been decreased, so if you do it at melee range, you will not stun for 0.5 seconds, which makes sense. Now it scales more linearly for the 5 seconds, because the max stun duration is still there, of course. And the minimum damage, kind of the same way, just scales a little bit differently, but lower for the melee range, if you will.
Yeah. What's really important about this is not only that, you know, the short range arrow or the melee arrow deals less damage and stuns less time. It also means that every single arrow in between minimum and max range is actually worse, right?
A little, barely though.
It grew linearly before, and it still does. And since the starting point is lower, the duration of any medium arrow is shorter, and it will deal less damage. So this is just a nerf to every single arrow that's not the max arrow. So this is a good change. I think if you look at the
numbers, it's like, so it's hard to gauge, but looking at the numbers, which I saw, it's very minimal change.
I think it's bigger than you think it is, especially for a support Mirana, where the early game is all about the arrow.
It's more prevalent at the very short range than it is the longer it gets.
Definitely.
Do you think this is enough, though, to... I mean, she was, like, picked every single game and banned a decent amount as well. Like,
I still think she's good, and the point is the arrow is still the amazing tool that it's supposed to be when you hit it from afar. But it's just those short-range arrows that are easy to hit and actually had a huge impact. You could say the arrow was just too good. Like, when you have an easy setup stun, like a Sand King stun or something like that, and you hit a medium-range arrow and it was like a 3.5 second stun for 200 damage, you'd be like, okay, is this really fair? It's supposed to be a really high impact, you know, how to put it, high risk, high reward kind of ability, where you need to hit the big one for it to be really good.
Yeah.
And this just pushes it even more in that direction, so I think that's good.
All right. Ogre Magi, multicast passive mana cost penalty has been reduced.
That's
and
really
good.
good.
Bloodlust can now be cast on magic immune allies, which...
That's even better.
Yes, I would... Bloodlust is... just become like, it's always been a good late game ability, but now that you can put it on top of BKBs or Omniknight, as we'll come to very soon, if he repels somebody, you can put it on that. Although actually maybe that was this just for BKB, or this means for repel as well? Because I remember in the last patch repel was changed.
It's so for everything. It says magic immune, so it should be both BKB and repel.
Is this enough to put Ogre Magi into the mix a bit?
I think it's pretty important, because previously the only times you would really pick Ogre Magi is if you had carries that did not go for BKB, like if you build a lineup with a Morphling who would not get BKB until very late in the game, or a Lone Druid who could use it because the bear wouldn't get a BKB, or, you know, that type of hero. Now you can put Ogre Magi with every single late game carry, which was kind of the weakness he had before, was that the way the game is played, 9 out of 10 carries will get a BKB. So he was very limited in what he could provide, and if you look at it, why would you pretty much ever pick Ogre Magi over other supports? It's for bloodlust. That's what makes him better than other supports. He's melee, which is terrible for a support. His stun is pretty bad compared to other stuns, and Ignite, sure, it's been buffed a bit and it's good, but not really good enough to pick him over other supports, which is why he's picked in like 1 out of 100 games, right? But now, if you feel like bloodlust is useful, you can build a lineup. You can pick any carry with it, and I think this is going to... I wouldn't be surprised to see like an increase of 500% in competitive picks based on that change alone. I think
he'll be picked 5 times.
Yeah, which is a huge change, right?
Yeah. Well, so Bloodlust is my favorite buff of all, or the buff itself is my favorite in the game. So I'm excited to see this guy for sure, or these guys. Is it considered 2 people? I don't know. It's 1 person with 2 heads, but they.
It's called Magi, right?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, we'll go with that.
Isn't it? Oh, I don't know.
Omniknight. Degen Aura. This guy keeps getting buff after buff after buff. I've always thought he's ridiculous, and now Degen Aura is even more ridiculous.
It's getting better, but I don't think this is what's going to bring Omniknight in. The thing that brings him into competitive is, first of all, people starting to build lineups around him, because he is restricted to some types of lineups where he's ridiculously good, and else he's kind of meh.
Well, I think
this doesn't change it for me at all.
You can't really play him as support. You have to get farm on this hero.
It depends. There are some games where you can go incredibly greedy, but the thing is, teams will not really think about it because they're not used to doing it. So whenever there is the opening for an Omniknight, teams will be like, oh wow, we can go for a greedy support, let's get something else. Which, in many cases, it will be better to get another greedy support, but sometimes Omniknight is just the pick. The problem is, since he's never picked, teams never think about him as the pick. So, yes, this brings a little more attention to him again by buffing Degen Aura, but I still think his main problem is just that in terms of strategizing, you need to build a lineup around him, which is, he's a lot more restricted than other supports, and he's supposed to be, so that's fine, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him as a pocket pick in a couple of strategies here and there, but teams just seem to not really like him that much. And this doesn't change it, I think.
I hate him, but he's fun to watch when I'm not playing in the game, so I'll just say that. Phantom Assassin, the bonus attack speed has been increased for Phantom Strike by 30. I can't remember, is Phantom Strike, does it last based on a certain amount of time, or is it a certain amount of attacks?
Time.
Okay, so he's going to get maybe... How many more attacks would this... I can't gauge this at all.
One.
So one extra attack during that duration.
One, maybe two.
Okay, so how do you think this changes anything? She was
not so much.
Now and then.
It just seems like a really weird number. I wonder what the reasoning is for 30% higher attack speed here on the ability, but the main issue that Blink Strike or Phantom Strike on Phantom Assassin still has is that you can't cast it on magic immune units. But if you could do that, maybe PA would be too good. So again, it's one of those changes where you need to be really careful, especially before an event like TI. You don't want to shake up things too much.
Yeah, true.
So I think that would be a too radical change for the version. And this overall just, again, brings a little more attention to the hero, which, yeah, it's
not
okay.
She was
I think
ever picked a ton, but when she was picked, it was mostly because of Wisp, which was then nerfed, and then to a smaller degree, Armlet, I feel like, which was also nerfed to the point where...
Did people ever get Armlet on that hero?
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's not the most common thing, but I think, yes, I know Loda did.
Oh, okay. I've seen it like once or twice.
Yeah, I always thought it was weird, and then I started seeing it more. I'm like, huh, I guess it kind of makes sense. I don't know, but either way, more so Wisp, obviously. So Queen of Pain, Shadow Strike range has been increased again. Now it's 525 at the highest level, and at the lowest, it's still higher than it used to be, which was then buffed in the last patch as well, I believe. So with a 4-second cooldown at level 4. So
again, this is still... It's a good buff, gives her more laning presence, and again, what you want to pick Queen of Pain for, you want to pick her to win the lane, because if she does not win the lane, I think, was it you and I who talked about it? In some cases, in most cases, she's just a worse Storm Spirit then, right? So...
Well, I think the three you think of in mid are Queen of Pain, Storm Spirit, and Puck, and the other two are just infinitely better in almost every way, currently.
Yeah,
like, and I think a big part of it has to do with
Queen of Pain better, but it's very restricted. And why she used to be a first pick was that she was dominating the lane, and they're trying to bring that back by buffing Shadow Strike. So we'll see if this is enough. I'm not sure.
I think another thing is she used to be she still is, I guess, getting the runes, but that's not as important anymore because of bottle crowing. Like, you can put anybody mid these days because of bottle crowing. So I think that was actually her biggest nerf, to be honest. Because aside from that, like, she needs to snowball, and the runes I thought were a big part of her play, but not the case anymore. We'll see what that does. Doubt it does anything though. Ricky Smokescreen cooldown's been reduced by 2. Okay.
Yep. Good
Skywrath
enough.
Mage, and this is a hero that I put as my top 3 pick to be seen a lot by TI4, and this may help my prediction a bit.
This is really huge.
Damage amplification has been increased by quite a bit, especially at the earlier levels.
The level 1 is as good as the old level 3. That's a huge change. So the reason I don't think this is too big of a buff is that the way Skywrath Mage works, he's kind of a glass cannon, and his main problem is no matter how you run him, if you're on a mid or support, he will always stay that. He has a very high mana cost, so he needs to have a high impact with the spells. And the problem is his ultimate, in theory, it's great because it deals so much damage, but the AoE is so small that it's very hard to land it reliably against many heroes. Now, with the improvement to Ancient Seal, not only does he get more impact on his own spells, but it's also in team combinations where now Skywrath as a support can actually be picked not only for the Ancient Seal to counter enemy heroes with the silence, but also just to buff up your entire team and how powerful this actually is in laning stages. So, and team fights for that matter. I really like this change. I thought Ancient Seal was actually too weak, so I like this. And it still has the same problem as it always did. If you compare that to any stun, which is what Skywrath Mage does not have, he has absolutely nothing against BKB. Now you could say a lot of supports don't, but the way the supports usually deal with it is that they hit their stun first before the target BKBs, like a Hex, Impale, Out of the Fog, whatever. Skywrath Mage will always be countered by BKB, and he still is. If he gets that amazing Ancient Seal ulti combo and the enemy presses one button, they take no damage. So
I'm trying to think of other. He
kind of needs to be more impactful in the early game.
I think other supports that are similar in that fashion. The first thing I thought of was Veno, and Gale, if you get it on them before BKB, it stays on them through. What if
Yeah.
like his slow from concussive shot, the slow stayed through
That
BKB or
might
something?
stay. That's actually true. I'm not sure.
No, I don't
but
think it
it's
does. I'm saying
still,
if they buff that to do that. I don't think it does.
yeah,
I don't
well,
even think the slow's long enough to matter though. I mean, Gale is
no.
completely different.
Even then, yeah, the slow is shorter, and Veno also, if the enemy team has BKBs, I mean, you still have other things you can provide for your team. You can defend the base with Plague Wards, which always are important. The moment the BKBs expire, Poison Nova is a way more reliable ability to land than Skywrath Ult, which is still a very, high risk, high reward kind of skill.
Right.
So, I like
guess
this change
Lich would
overall.
be
I think
maybe
it's
the
going to get picked
closest
a bit more.
comparison, perhaps.
Yeah, but then again, Ice Armor is amazing in all stages of the game.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Ancient Seal's so good. It's so. I liked it before. You didn't like it as much, but it's now redonkulous.
It was good. Now it's actually
He'll
really
be
good,
picked,
which it needs
syndereN.
to be.
He'll be picked. I promise you.
I think so too. I love that hero, by the way. So it's cool.
All right, Slardar bash bonus has been increased by 20 at all levels, I believe. Yes.
Yep.
Okay, that's very nice. I think the problem. I don't know if it's a problem with this here. Maybe it would make him too good, but like for his crush, and I believe it's the same way for his bash. Sometimes I get it confused, but the actual bash does not go through BKB, but the damage does.
The
Or is it
bash
the other way
goes. It's the other. No, both go through BKB because the damage of the bash is physical. So the damage goes through and the stun goes through. But Slithering Crush, the stun is magical, but the damage is physical.
Okay, so that's the one. Okay.
Yes, and if that goes through BKB, he's ridiculous. So
Okay.
there's no way that's going to happen. But I think Slardar is good enough. He's one of those heroes that you see once in a while when teams realize how good he is. He came out of nowhere at TI3, and Orange actually did really well with him. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him getting picked up. He is still incredible with any sort of secondary carry because of how amplified damage just crushes single targets.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, again, just draws a little more attention to him. I don't even know if he needed a buff. I'm not going to argue with it because he's pretty low on the pick list, but
Yeah.
and it's one of those heroes where you just need to see the opening and then he's incredible. So I like this. It's
All right,
okay.
and then Treant Protector, who we saw in every single game, whether we liked it or not, his Leech Seed damage has been decreased a bit at the earlier levels. I
Actually,
think,
quite a lot on level 1.
yeah. Now, what made this hero very good for you in the early stages? Was it the damage or the slow? Because I feel like the slow was more important.
The combination of having damage, slow, and heal,
And his
and
right
those
clicks.
values.
And Treant's ridiculous right clicks.
Yes. So I think it's good that this gets nerfed on the earlier levels. I completely agree with not nerfing it on the higher levels, or very little, at least on level 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Because it's not really that powerful at that point. It's
You
just
don't see
ridiculous
Treant late
level
game
1.
doing anything other than ulting.
So I think this is okay. I'm wondering if was too big of a nerf, but I won't really argue with nerfing Leech Seed, especially on level 1. It was pretty much too good. So.
I think he's still picked. It's fine. Maybe not first ban. I don't know. We'll see.
Mhm.
Tusk. Now, this one's an interesting one. So Snowball has been reduced as far as cooldown's concerned, just a little bit. Scales now. And the Walrus Punch cooldown has been reduced as well. We haven't seen this hero a ton since he got changed majorly in the last patch. And I know that you're sad about that. Does this maybe put him back in the fold? It's not a huge change.
No, I don't know. It's a weird. Again, I always feel like when these abilities reduce their cooldown by 1 per level and they start at 21, it just seems a little,
It's like the Darkseer conundrum with Vacuum, except the opposite effect. So maybe
I don't know.
3 patches away.
It's obviously important, even if it's just a few seconds, but it's not the biggest of deals. What I generally look for when I see these cooldown reductions, I look for, does this matter for whether you get 1 or 2 off in a fight? And I think Snowball is that type of ability that you get off once. Even if the cooldown was like 14, then I still think most times you get it off once, because it's an ability you commit with, and then you either win the fight or lose the fight. It's not really a kiting ability as such, even though it got changed to be better at that. Do you catch my drift here? That
Yes.
I don't think this, in comparison to other abilities that have had cooldown reductions in the past, I think this one matters a lot less. But as far as Walrus Punch goes, it's actually, that's more important, because this is the type of ability that, sure, when you commit, you probably get it off once, but it's more about your ability to gank really quickly in a row. So, alright, maybe I'm a little inconsistent here with my analysis, to be honest, because Snowball is also kind of the same logic. Like, if you commit with Snowball and you use Walrus Punch, you've committed, right? So
well, I think they're different for Walrus Punch because you have to keep in mind when you activate it, it stays on for a while, so you can actually do a couple of them pretty quickly in succession. As
on the
opposed to
high
Snowball,
level, easily. That's the big difference. It lasts, I think it lasts 10, right?
I'm not sure.
Something like that. So on level 3, if you precast it, you go in and then you hit it when it's about to expire. That's realistic to get 2 off in the same fight. But on level 1, not so much. So it still has the same weakness on level 1 as before, but I personally don't think Tusk needed a buff. I think he's good enough as he is. It's just teams need to get used to playing with him and using him because he's... The previous patch that changed him radically.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's going to take time, like you said. And I think by TI4, he's also my top 3 of heroes that are going to be picked out of nowhere, as we'll call it at least, even though we're kind of predicting it.
He's going to be picked a lot more relative to what he was before. He's one of those. I think Skywrath goes in there as well.
Yeah, well, so. Skywrath probably to a lesser degree, but yeah, we'll see. Undying intelligence growth has been increased by 0.5. How much difference does this actually make? I mean, he is a strength hero, and he does rely on his mana quite a bit.
Yeah. To me, he's still just the same pocket pick as he has always been. He's the type of hero that's amazing for early game team fights. So if you build a lineup around that, that's great. I don't think this changes anything. I mean, it's good for him to get a little bit better. He's still not picked too much, but perhaps the logic is his abilities are actually kind of expensive with how much you use them. And he loses a little bit potential by not having the mana to cast them. So let's see, when you're level 6, you have an additional 3 intelligence because of this. No, 2.5. So that's another, like, what's that, 2.5 times 13? That's about 32 mana. That's almost another decay cast. So
that'll be more than that.
It's decent.
Okay.
And of course, when you level up more, it's even more, right? So.
And of course, there's so many changes that they did to him last patch that I don't remember most of them, but we haven't seen him picked still, so we'll see. Maybe that's one of those things where it just takes a while for people to realize how good he is. Or maybe how bad he still is. I don't know. But the problem is, like, he's used as a support melee, and he drops off considerably into the mid and late game. Okay, Windranger. Focus fire mana cost has been decreased.
It's going to be 0 next version.
Seriously, like, it was buffed last patch, buffed this patch.
It used to be 200, 300, 400?
Well, it never made sense that it was that much.
Now it's 75, 100, 125.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we'll see
I think this hero is going to be picked more than people expect, but maybe not in the role that they are expecting. I still think it's a really good mid laner, and now that Focus Fire is starting to become relevant, I think it's mainly Arteezy who's been experiencing with it in particular pub games, but I think this hero is actually a pretty powerful core. And Shackle Shot is, as always, the really either extremely good or extremely awful ability in fights. So it is just an all or nothing kind of play you need to make with it. But when you hit the all play, it's insanely good on a pretty low cooldown too, compared to what it does. So I would imagine we see this more, and I love how much love Focus Fire has got, because in my book it was the worst ability in the game, probably hands down in the last, let's see.
Worst ability or worst ultimate?
Oh, compared to, yeah, definitely the worst ultimate, but yeah, worst ability I guess not, but just for how much mana it cost and what it did, maybe it was even the worst ability in the game.
We'd have to go
I mean,
back
when it wasn't even skilled as an ultimate ability, that kind of tells you about how bad it was.
Well, she was so good regardless. That's the hilarious part.
But now with the kit, this is something I've desired for a long time, for Focus Fire to start getting good, and now with the Ags buff to it, with the lower mana cost, with the instant cast point, it's starting to get really, really good now. So I like that a lot. And of course, you also carry it over even, right? You don't have to attack the same target anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really good as a core now. I like it.
All right, so Zeus is the last hero change. Lightning Bolt Vision and True Sight duration has been increased by 1.5, and the search area of effect increased by 75. So this is in addition, of course, to all the changes that were made to him, which I would consider buffs overall for sure. To his more of his laning and his chase ability, I guess is the word I'd use. Just being able to cast this on the ground is pretty. Actually, I haven't even played him since they changed him, but
no, me neither. I don't know why though.
I need to. I love that hero, but I feel like this hero can be played. The problem is, like, again, the same thing as other heroes that are mid. He has no escape mechanism whatsoever. But I feel like you can say that about a lot of heroes that do play mid. So what is preventing him from being played?
He gets 100% countered by BKBs, but There are other mids that do that too. The thing, I don't know, honestly. I think this hero is actually really good. But you need to, again, it's one of those where, first of all, you need to realize that it's a good pick in this situation, and you need to build a lineup around having Zeus peak. Because later on in the game, he just falls off really heavily compared to other heroes. Sure, static field scales with the enemy HP, which is great, but in the later portions of the game, it's so much more about explosive engages, where you go in, you kill someone really quick, you have hexes, you have BKBs, and you just overrun Zeus. He cannot deal with that. He doesn't have anything. He's slow, he has bad stats, he has bad armor, I think. And he's a plumber. So he needs to be better in some sort of way. And I think Zeus is probably the best hero in terms of just raw damage output for about minute 10 to minute 25 maybe. If you get a fast Veil, if you get maybe even an Ags or something like that, he's insane.
How about adding? How about Ags adds the same effect that Lina's does now, where
so
his ult goes through BKB? Yeah.
I actually don't think that would be overpowered.
I mean, the real issue is with that. I don't know if it's an issue, but of course, static field is what gives you a ton of the damage in these team fights, and that probably wouldn't go through BKB as a result.
But it would still make a difference, right? Then you could do something in BKB, which you really can't. So he would, to me, he would be way too good if you started letting static field and stuff go through BKB, because that's his weakness, is that he's only magic based. But I think this change for me is not the, you know, the value of the true sight duration is 50% higher, which is pretty sick.
I mean, he could just counter ward by himself now, but the problem is, like, he's a core hero. You don't want him investing a ton of time counter warding either.
You don't pick Zeus to counter ward.
Right.
It's
kind of the same thing with Slark, except Slark with his ultimate, or it's his ultimate, he'll just tell his team, okay, there's a ward here, go deward it, as opposed to Zeus has to do it himself. You know, that's kind of the problem.
He has to cast to find it, whereas Slark just runs past and sees that he loses his ultimate. That's a really big difference.
I mean, this is a hero that never has really made an impact on the competitive scene, and I think he's fun to watch. We need to see this hero.
It was a big pick in Dota 1 6 years ago.
I feel like it was longer than that. I mean, Merlini made it popular, I guess.
He was big in 648B, when every hero could get Blink Dagger, and you could blink even after taking damage.
Yeah,
that's when Zeus was good, because he could really just chase heroes down and do a lot of damage early on. It was so heavily burst-oriented, that game style, so Zeus was great. I expect this hero to be picked more, but not because of this version. I don't think these changes are the most important ones. I think the important one was the previous version, similar to Tusk.
Takes a while for people to realize.
It takes time.
Yeah,
it really does.
All right, last but not least, Mjolnir has been nerfed a bit more, as it was completely overpowered previous to the last patch. We don't really need to talk about this. What are your impressions of the patch in general as we wrap this up?
Like I said before we went into it, small changes, but all of them, or a couple of medium-sized changes, if you will, but overall just not the biggest of deals, which I agree with a lot, since TI4 is coming close and the team's already 6.81 was a really big change that the teams have not adapted to yet. So, like I said, I pretty much agree with every single change overall. None of them are too huge. All of them make sense.
Except for the Lina.
And, sorry?
Except for the Lina.
Yeah, the Lina one, well, it's a buff, which...
Yeah, it's a buff.
It makes sense to buff Lina. It just seems like a really arbitrary way of doing it in some sense, but... overall, I agree with pretty much everything, and as far as shifting the metagame, I don't think this is going to bring any significant changes with it compared to the previous version, but overall, the heroes, the most important thing about this version was that Lycan and Batrider got nerfed.
Yes.
I think that's the most crucial thing. All other heroes that receive buffs is great, or Invoker as well, by the way. So Invoker, Batrider, Lycan got significant nerfs. Mirana's, we were not completely certain how big was. I think it's decent, not a huge nerf compared to the other heroes we mentioned. And the nerf to Doom, which, nah, that's not really significant compared to the others. So, yeah. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this, and I think mainly we're going to see a lower pick and ban rate on Batrider and on Lycan because of this, which is what I guess most people wanted.
I hope so.
That's my most important thing about the version.
Not that they're going to be picked a ton, but I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more Drow, a little bit more Earthshaker. Let's see, Juggernaut, Ogre Magi especially. Maybe I mean I don't think
the biggest buff.
Yeah, I don't think Omniknight's going to get picked a whole lot as a result of this, but I'm hoping that we get to see a little bit of him at least. Queen of Pain, I think, is still going to be untouched, or if she is touched, she'll still get destroyed in every game. Skywrath Mage, I'd be looking forward to seeing her as well, and although I doubt it, Zeus is the one that I really want to be seen. or played competitively, but maybe next patch. We'll see. So, with that, thanks for watching the 6.81b analysis brought to you by me and syndereN. Thanks for analyzing this for me, syndereN. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.